Good morning, everyone. I'm Amelia Dunlop. This is Laura Shact. This is where we have an amazing video for you that is not playing. So I'm going to tell you what that video had to say. So in that video, we proposed two different paths. There's the path of fear. It's dominated by this idea of headlines where AI is going to take over the world, and it's going to kind of challenge humanity, and it's coming for us all. And it's one that's paralyzing because of that fear. And then the second path is this path of idealism. It's the path where we run headlong into the possibility of a future that's really bright around AI. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to solve world problems. And we have this dilemma of these two paths. And the question that we want to put for all of you is, which is true? What is that path? And then more importantly, which is true for you and for the people that you look after and the organizations that you serve?
So as you ponder those questions, let's explore for a moment that path taken by fear. So technology disruption is nothing new. We've seen these disruptions times and times before. First started with Socrates. He spoke about how the beginning of writing was the end of memory. And we've seen them again and again. The printing press, the photography, and even most recently with the iPhone being the end of attention. Each of these moments not only represents a technological disruption, but also an opportunity to change human behavior. And so as we think about those technology shifts, one of the things that is very important here is that we take that moment and we participate. There is an option, right? What if you were that individual who opted for the horse-drawn buggy versus the car? And there's really a risk there. There's a risk of opting out, becoming irrelevant, and that's why it's so important, why all of us are here today, to really participate and help shape that future of living with AI.
No, exactly. I mean, we realize that there have been disruptive moments before in history, just as Laura shared, but there is something pretty different about this moment, right? And we think there's two things. There's a moment now where the pace of change has changed, and the volume of data is changing. And we know that what used to take generations to incorporate the changes in the iPhone, the changes in the printing press, we're now being asked to incorporate in a weekend. And in terms of the volume of data, in 2015, the volume of data increased by 300%, and by 2025, it's going to be 1,000%. So just the sheer volume and pace of change is different in this moment. And that's why it's not so much that I'm worried that AI is going to replace us. It's actually that there's a human who's going to be using that AI, that they're the ones that are going to replace us. So that's why the path of doing nothing with this fear is not tenable. So let's go take a look at the other path, the path of idealism. And I think you can't have been here today and yesterday and not feel the energy, right? Not feel the excitement about the possibility of what AI can do for us. But more than any other word, when we talk about Gen AI that you might have heard over the last 2 days, I feel one word has stuck out, which is trust. People are talking about, what does it mean to have trust in the AI that we're going to kind of be living with? But we don't want to just talk about the word trust. What we did is we actually measured it. And we ran a little study 3 months ago on how much does a customer trust you when they know that your brand is using AI. And I'll give you the situation, because this is the audience participation part. So we asked, in a contact center situation, if you have Bob, and you know Bob is a human answering your questions, versus if you have Bob, and Bob is a bot answering your questions, and your perception of trust. So I'll give you the headline: trust does decline, right, when we know that AI is being used. But by how much? So any takers? What do you think? Does trust decline? Maybe 10%? Show of hands. 20? I can't really see you all. You gotta be big. Show me 30%. Anyone think 30%? We have a couple 30% over here, Laura. Anyone higher than that? Anyone 40, 50? Ooh, higher. Good. Okay, so we think trust is going to decline a lot. Let's show them what we learned. Yeah. So we learned that when a customer knows that your brand is using AI, their trust in you drops 144%. Got it? And that's from a net positive to the net negative. And that's how you can get a change greater than 100%. So that's kind of bad, right? It's not just, ooh, we think there might be a risk to humanity. It's like, no, there's an actual concern that our average users have around what it means to trust the AI that we're putting out in the world. Okay, but you ready? What's even more is when your employee knows that you're using AI, their perception of your empathy and your humanity drops even more, 188%, right? So we all know that our organizations are using AI or are running really rapidly with use cases, but it's kind of sad, right, Laura?
It's pretty sad. So here's the thing. We just presented two options, right? The one that's dominated by fear, where you opt out and you become really irrelevant. There's a risk there. And the path that's led by idealism, which means you can run head first and without potentially exploring this impact to the humans. And this is where we really spend a lot of our time, right? We cannot create real value with AI until the humans trust the machines enough to adopt it. So we believe there is a third path.
And we call that path the path humans with machines. It's the one where technological augmentation elevates the human experience in ways that we didn't previously think were possible. And it allows us to design the machine for that human, and then equally to prepare the humans for the machines. So what we wanted to do is talk a little bit about what does it mean to be on this third path? One that's neither dominated by fear nor idealism. So it often starts with an AI use case, right? You wouldn't be here if you didn't have an AI use case, if your organization wasn't exploring AI use cases. And that's typically about solving a business problem, taking something that could take thousands of hours and reducing it down to kind of mere minutes. But we think that beyond just the AI use case, we need to first ask the question, what's the human problem that we're trying to solve? What's the problem for your customer? What's the problem for your employee? Because none of them woke up this morning as customers or employees. They woke up as humans first. And there are enduring human needs around the need for connection, the need for empathy, the need to feel like you're learning and growing and creating. And how do we solve for that human part when it comes to generative AI? And then equally, what does it mean to build their trust, to build the machines to be trustworthy, and then to put it all together and prepare our entire workforce for this future? So we're going to double click into each one of these. You with me so far? Any acknowledgement would be good. All right, I see thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, this is the value of being in person, like not on Zoom, right? You can actually kind of have some kind of interaction, right? Make it a little bit of fun. Okay, so to be human-centered, we ask the question, what is that human need that we're solving for before we try to push out a technology just because we can? And we did some research with chief experience officers this past summer, about 250 of them. Their number one concern with AI is the loss of human connection and the fact that we might delegate too much of our responsibilities and too much of what is really valuable from a human perspective to AI. And we know, and there's probably designers out here in the room, that the whole field of human-centered design emerged in relationship to these big machines, right? The bigger the machine got, the more we actually had to design for what they called the human factor. And we had to incorporate the humans with the machines so that we could understand how they could work together more productively. And this is one of those famous examples where the first flip phone that launched in the 1990s, 95% of the features and functions were irrelevant. There was no human using them because they were designed because they had a use case that was possible, but not because there was a human need that asked for it. So it's just an example of how, over time, we've gotten better designing with humans in mind. OK, so here's your checklist for what does it mean to be human-centered. There's 3 things we think you can do. The first is start by asking why. Yes, we can do this, but why are we doing that? Whose life are we making better? Which problem are we solving? How are we removing friction from a process for a human? Then the second thing is keep asking that question, because this is the kind of change that is continuous. And how do we gather feedback with always-on listening? And this is a place where we can actually use AI to measure people's sentiment about AI using platforms like Natter. And then finally, how can we co-create with the humans? Because as designers and engineers, we have the responsibility of creating the future. And we can design for a future that is more accessible and is more inclusive, as opposed to designing our current biases into that future. So that's how we think we can get started from a human-centered perspective. Okay, so now, if you want to build trust with those humans, what can you do? So we know trust is important because it drives the behaviors that we care about, right? From a business perspective, it drives things like likelihood to purchase, less likely to look for a new job, and these things are important. And we know CEOs out there care about these issues around trust, but we consistently overestimate how trusted we are, whether it's for employees or for our customers. And so that's why we kind of nerded out and created a way of measuring trust, which we call the 4 factors of trust. I will assure you, the world didn't need another measurement system for trust. But what we realized is we wanted something that was really practical and forward-looking, not a benchmark, not backward-looking, but something that we as leaders could use on an everyday basis. So what this is you measure not the question of, do you trust me? Which, by the way, you're only ever going to get biased answers with that question. But we ask questions like, what's your perception of our humanity? And our willingness to treat people kindly and with respect? What's your sense of our transparency in clearly sharing all the relevant context? Do you think we're reliable at showing up and doing what we said we were going to do again and again and again? And are we capable with the quality and services and products that you would expect? These are the 4 factors that are actually predictive of trust and predictive of the types of behaviors that we're all looking for. So with this, we realize that trustworthy companies outperform their peers by up to 4 times. And we also know that they recover from the pandemic twice as fast. So here's your checklist on how you can start to build trust with these humans. First, measure it, right? Go to 4factorsoftrust.com. It's free, it's open source. We want you to start measuring it. And then incorporate that into your AI use cases. So you can design for a more trustworthy experience with your AI. And then just remeasure it and see where you are and make those course corrections over time as we continue on this journey of what we think is a more human-centered path with AI.
All right, so now we move to the trustworthy machines. And this is where it gets fun. This is where most of us think about with the booths you may have spent time on outside. Let me see by a show of hands, who spent yesterday going through videos of Google's Gemini? Okay, see a few hands. I got lost.
Yeah, I got some over here.
I see. Okay, I see some. I'm seeing some fellow nerding out on there. So that's many of us, right? I know I actually feel a little naked without my smartwatch today because that's what I rely on to basically tell me how to breathe, when to stand up, when to sit down, and really engage a lot with the technology. But that's not what we see from the general users. Less than 50% of consumers are comfortable using AI, and with companies using AI to personalize their experiences because of concerns around privacy and security. So we know the context is really important and really matters to them. So let me show you this image for a moment. Let me again, by a show of hands, see from you, if you were walking down the street today, right, in Manhattan, and this was a picture taken of you or a picture you're thinking about of that street, how many of you feel uncomfortable? Okay.
We got a few out there.
Yeah. So most of us think of this as a law enforcement example, right? And we're looking for criminals who we will identify and then indict. And again, what might be some of the risks there of bias and privacy? But what if we told you that this was using facial recognition to identify victims, the victims of kidnapping or human trafficking? Do you feel different? So this is what's really important, is thinking about all of these different dimensions and the context that matters. And for all of us, as we apply that now to the use cases in our organizations, coming up with very clear measures of how we think about things like privacy, data, security, and measure them. So we are fortunate, one of our colleagues, Bina Amanath, leads our space around technology trust. And she came up with this framework, Trustworthy AI framework. And what's really unique about it is it has these 7 different measures of things around the space of compliance, but also governance, reskilling and education, to help bring about the types of questions that you can bring into a conversation and assess any use case against. So how are we accessing the data? how are we setting controls, how are we governing the data, and how, we've been talking about human in the loop, how are we engaging with a human in the loop as we monitor these things over time. So one of the things we want to share with you is having this type of framework is something that you can take practically as you come back to maybe the use case at hand, early conversations. So getting started with this framework or one of your choosing and really assessing what are those ethical safeguards that you'll use in your organization. And then not just putting them on a page as a design principle, I know many of us are guilty of doing that, but then actually using them, bringing them back out as you're making prioritization decisions, budgeting, investment decisions against those dimensions, and then having, not just a one and done. I know a lot of times we do like mission statements and design principles, they sit on our websites, but actually bringing those back out and monitoring over time. So not only do we have the machines, now we have to bring this all together. We talked about the humans, we talked about the machines. When we bring it together, it's really about how are we supporting those humans? How do we make the humans skilled, willing, and able? So most of our conversations about workforce, as I've been here the last 24 hours, were around productivity. And that's absolutely true. We see the potential. You'll see stats all the way ranging from 20%, 50%, up to 66% of potential productivity improvement, especially in some of the key areas that are being disrupted first around business writing, so content generation, programming, and customer support. But just putting on a page of research around how we can be more productive, how do we unlock that to actually sustain in our organizations? And that's where we think about this human factor, about reskilling and education. Now, what's really interesting about Gen AI, this is different from a lot of other technologies where, the average human sort of says, that's not really for me. They're actually, quite intimidated, and it's for the technologists. But what we see is organizations to moving of a more generative AI fluency for everyone. So their executives are in learning, their business users are in learning around thinking about the business impact of use case. They're doing things like prompt-a-thons. They can't hack. They're not going to pull together code, but they're thinking about what are those prompts, right? What are those business problems we want to solve? And then also the training for the technologists. We have that at Deloitte. We have an AI Academy. We've been doing that for about 2 years of a journey around all different types of our workforce and what are the things that they need to know about how a large language model works, right? How do they know how to identify bias and how to prompt to get the business impact they want out of it? And we see other organizations doing this as well. We see Amazon has a machine learning university. They've taken 2,000 people and reskilled them into machine learning capability. And there's also this impact that it's not just learning, it actually changed the skills of the organization. So identifying what those skills are that are needed in the future, hiring for them, and then also creating internal mobility to find those people who might be sitting in your organization. And we've seen examples of companies like Vodafone who did that. Internally found 40% of their roles for software development roles with people inside their existing organization. So how do you do this? As we think about taking this back to your organizations, it's first creating that organizational readiness. So I work with a lot of organizations that might not be jumping in, right, based on their function to Gen AI right away. I see this often in HR. So HR is enabling a lot of the workforce shifts of IT, but maybe is trying to figure out where are they going to rely on some of the big providers like those we see here to bring the AI to them. And what's interesting is while they may not yet be deep in use cases, what they're figuring out is what are all those human impacts that we need to be ready for, sort of as a predecessor, right? Creating a jobs framework, a skills framework, thinking about what are our target levels of proficiency, what is a target level proficiency, how to identify what skills people have today, and creating that learning path. So doing some of that benchmarking and identifying those key skills now is absolutely sort of a first step, I'd say, no matter where you are on your own Gen AI journey. And then thinking about workforce planning, right? So we've talked a lot about at the individual level productivity, but what does that mean when you now take cohorts and you're trying to determine how many people do we need to budget for hiring next year? and 5 years later. And so building in a workforce planning and in identifying those skills and actually assessing that over time. And then finally, it's about activating change management, right? This is not a one and done example. What we're seeing is Gen AI is rolling out gradually, unevenly between different industries, between different functions. And something here is this is not an academic exercise. Like, this is actually really fun. And how do you get people to practice and just play with the technology, right? A lot of us and many of our executives in our organizations are reading about it. And I always encourage people to be using the tech, even if it's something like, tell me how you used it this weekend to plan, your travel itinerary. I often tell an example about how I sat down with my kids and my mother over Thanksgiving week to actually be playing with creating coloring book pages using Midjourney for my kids, which is a whole other funny example. But it's really about that practice and that play, and also putting in all these factors for your employees and measuring if it's working, right? We talked about trust. And so once you have some of these activities in place, you can measure the ROI by looking at your trust, your baseline, and where you move over time to continue to make adjustments. So we want to leave you with this. We've talked about all these 4 factors, and this is your take-home checklist of these 4 different pieces. What I'll say is most organizations are doing 1 or 2 of them, right? They're focused on their use case, so it's often with the technology. And really the power of thinking about the human and thinking across all 4 is where I encourage you to take away. And also to remember that these are not, they're really not just in one order. They can come in all different sequences and shift over time.
Yeah. So the headlines currently are dominated by fear or idealism. And I think the question that Laura and I wanted to leave you with today is, what headline will you write when it comes to the path of human with machine? So again, I'm Amelia Dunlop.
Laura Shact.
And please stay connected with us, find us on LinkedIn, and thank you so much for having us.